Day after my son's wedding, while I was still folding the leftover napkins from the reception and eating cold chicken from a foil container, my daughter-in-law called to tell me she'd already spoken to a real estate agent about my house. Not to ask, not to suggest, to inform. I said, "I see." Then I hung up and smiled at the wall for a long moment because she had just made the most expensive miscalculation of her life. My name is Winifred Cole. I'm 69 years old, and I've lived in the same house in Savannah, Georgia for 31 years. The house on Magnolia Lane has a wraparound porch, a fig tree in the backyard that my late husband planted the year our son was born, and original hardwood floors that creak in the same three spots they've always creak. My husband Gerald passed 14 months ago, pancreatic cancer, which is the kind that doesn't give you time to say the things you should have said years earlier. We had 41 years together, which sounds like plenty, until you're standing in a kitchen that smells like his coffee and realizing you'll never make enough for two again. If you're listening from somewhere else tonight, drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels. And please stay until the end. It matters. I need to go back a little to the first time I met my daughter-in-law. My son Owen is 42, a civil engineer who designs drainage systems for municipalities across Georgia and South Carolina. He's the kind of man who double-checks his work 3 times, tips generously, and remembers to ask people how their mother is doing. He was raised right, though I say so myself. He met her 2 years before the wedding at a conference in Atlanta. Her name is Bethany, and she works in corporate relocation. She helps companies move their headquarters and compensates their executives for the inconvenience of uprooting their lives. That's the actual job. She is very good at it. She arrived to our first dinner 17 minutes late, which she explained by saying traffic in Atlanta is impossible, as though she were the first person to have ever encountered I-288. She was 36, polished in that particular way where everything matches and nothing is accidental. The earrings, the bag, the way she held the menu at an angle to suggest she'd been to better restaurants than this one. She shook my hand and said, "Owen talks about you constantly," in a tone that made it sound like a character flaw. I wore a yellow cardigan that night. I remember because she glanced at it exactly once and then never again, which told me everything. Gerald liked her. He always looked for the best in people, sometimes past the point where it was still reasonable. "She's ambitious," he said on the drive home. "Give her time." I gave her time. 18 months of it. She came to our house for Thanksgiving once, spent most of it on her phone in the guest room, and told Owen the drive from Atlanta was too far to make a habit of. They got married last October in Hilton Head at a resort that cost more per night than my first car. I was seated at a table near the back with Gerald's brother Frank and a cousin of Bethany's, who spent the reception explaining why cruise ships are underrated. Owen danced with Bethany to a song I didn't recognize, and looked at her the way he used to look at the ocean as a little boy, like something vast and a little frightening that he desperately wanted to get closer to. Gerald wasn't there. He'd been gone 8 months by then. I wore navy blue and held it together until the father-daughter dance, which played even though Bethany's father had declined to attend, and the song echoed across an empty dance floor for 40 seconds before the DJ moved on. I cried in the bathroom and came back out and ate the salmon. What happened next started slowly. The phone calls where Owen sounded slightly rehearsed. The visit he made in December where he kept circling the subject of long-term planning without landing anywhere, and then the call, 3 days after the wedding, while I was still eating cold chicken on my porch. "Mom, Bethany thinks we should talk about the house." "Which house?" "Your house. Your house. She's been in touch with someone at a realty group. Just preliminary." "Owen." I set down the foil container. "I haven't been out of my wedding shoes for 72 hours. I know, but she says the market in Savannah is strong right now, and tell her I'll call her myself." I didn't call. I waited. I wanted to see what came next. What came next was a dinner invitation, 3 weeks later, at their apartment in Atlanta. Bethany answered the door in cream linen and directed me to a chair, the way you direct a visiting client, not a parent. She'd made a charcuterie board and opened a bottle of wine that was very good and clearly meant to soften something. We ate. Owen talked about a drainage project in Macon. Bethany refilled my glass once and then folded her hands on the table and said, "Winifred, we've been doing some research. That was when I understood that the research had been happening for some time. She pulled up the Chatham County property records. My house, according to the county assessor, was valued at $612,000. She said this the way a doctor announces a diagnosis, factual, not unkind, but final. She said that as a 69-year-old widow living alone, I was sitting on an appreciating asset I wasn't fully utilizing. She said the house had 3 bedrooms and I was using one. She said the yard required more upkeep than was realistic for someone my age. She said there was a community in Pula called Harbor Springs, independent living, she emphasized, not assisted, with excellent amenities and a shuttle to the Publix on Abercorn. She said all of this in the measured tone she probably used with executives being relocated from Chicago to Phoenix. Sympathetic, efficient, done. Owen sat beside her and didn't say a word. And the house? I asked. We'd list it in the spring. The timing is good. We've already spoken to an agent, Sandra Pruitt at Coastal Properties. She sold 4 houses on your street in the past 18 months. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printed listing sheet, a brochure for Harbor Springs with a photo of 2 white-haired women playing cards, and a document with a heading I recognized as a general durable power of attorney. This would let Owen manage your finances during the transition, she said. Nothing complicated, just a precaution. I looked at Owen. Did you ask her to prepare this? He rubbed the back of his neck. We talked about it. We decided together, Bethany said. Because Owen worries constantly. You're alone in that house, Winifred. The roof needs work. I had the roof inspected in September. It's fine. The foundation. Also inspected. Clean report. She paused for half a second, then reset. The point isn't the specifics. The point is that if something happened to you, Owen would have no way to act quickly. He'd be tied up in probate, in legal fees, in processes that take months while the house sits. The power of attorney prevents that. And the proceeds from the sale would go into a managed account. We'd handle the investment decisions. Bethany has her Series 65, Owen added, like a man reading from cue cards. A managed account that you manage. For your benefit, Bethany said. With an allowance, a distribution, monthly. Enough for everything you'd need at Harbor Springs and then some. I looked at the power of attorney document. I looked at the Harbor Springs brochure. I looked at my son, who was staring at the charcuterie board as though the prosciutto might rescue him. I'll need some time to think, I said. Bethany's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Of course, we're not pressuring you. We just want you to understand that if this isn't handled proactively, the alternative may be less. She paused to select the word comfortable. Georgia law allows family members to petition for a conservatorship when there's evidence that an adult can't manage their own affairs. Owen would never want to go that route. But if it came to that, it would be public and slow and, frankly, more disruptive for everyone. There it was. Owen said quietly, Mom, we're just trying to help. I drove home to Savannah on I-16 with the windows down because I needed the noise. The Spanish moss was lit up silver by the highway lights, and the night smelled like salt and pine, and I thought about Gerald, the way he used to say that the best defense was never the one your opponent could see coming. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the porch with tea, and I thought about everything I had. Very deliberately, never told anyone. My name is Winifred Cole, and I was not a homemaker. For 28 years, while Owen thought I answered phones at a medical office downtown, I was the co-owner and operating partner of Cole Medical Properties, a commercial real estate company Gerald and I founded in 1996 that acquired, leased, and managed medical office buildings across Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee, not residential, medical, which is recession-resistant, federally reimbursed, and extraordinarily stable. We started with 1 building in Augusta and ended with 19. Gerald ran the acquisitions and the banking relationships. I ran the operations, the leases, the tenant negotiations, and the books. We hired a management team in 2011 when the portfolio grew past what 2 people could reasonably handle, and we moved into a more advisory role. But the equity was always ours, 50-50, same as the day we incorporated. When Gerald died, I inherited his half. The portfolio, at last independent appraisal, was valued at $31.4 million. I own it free and clear. We never told Owen. We made that decision when he was 12, after we watched the son of one of our tenants, a radiologist who'd done very well, drop out of Georgia Tech because he knew the money was coming eventually. We didn't want eventually to be an excuse. We wanted Owen to be an engineer because he loved engineering. He does. I called my friend Sylvia the next morning. Sylvia is 74 and the sharpest person I have ever personally known. She was a federal appellate judge for 19 years before she retired, and she still reads case law the way other people read novels for pleasure. We've been friends since our boys played Little League together in 1994. They threatened conservatorship, I said when I finished explaining. A brief silence. Bethany did, with Owen sitting right there. Dorothy. How much does Owen know about Cole Medical? Nothing. How much does Bethany know? She thinks Gerald had a pension and a 401k. She thinks the house is the primary asset. Another silence, longer this time. Then, well, this is going to be instructive. That week I did what I should have done 14 months earlier, when I was too deep in grief to think about anything except getting through the next hour. I pulled the fire safe out of the bedroom closet and spread everything across the dining room table. The original partnership agreement for Cole Medical Properties, LLC, dated March 14th, 1996. Gerald Thomas Cole and Winifred Ann Cole, equal members. The current portfolio summary from our property management firm, showing 19 buildings, 94% occupancy, annual net operating income of $2.1 million. The independent appraisal dated August 2024, conducted by Meridian Valuation Partners out of Charlotte. Total portfolio value, $31,400,000. The title to the house on Magnolia Lane. Paid off in 2017. Mine. 2 personal brokerage accounts, one at Fidelity, one at Charles Schwab, totaling $4.8 million. A $1.5 million term life insurance payout, received April of last year, now sitting in a money market fund. Gerald's IRA, which I had rolled over into my own account, $890,000. I photographed every page and uploaded everything to a secure cloud folder. Then I called our accountant, a methodical man named Howard who has managed our books since 2004 and who, when I explained the situation, went very quiet for a moment before saying, "Winifred, I'm going to give you the name of an attorney." The attorney was Eleanor Marsh, and I want to be clear that this was a remarkable coincidence of names, because the Eleanor Marsh I was referred to was a real person, a 60-year-old elder law specialist in Savannah, with a reputation for what Howard called aggressive clarity. Her office was on Drayton Street, 3 blocks from the river, and her waiting room had a framed print that said in plain block letters, "Your AG is not your liability." I liked her immediately. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, made 3 pages of notes, and then said, "First, I want you to understand what they actually have. They have a county assessor's record and a theory. What you have is documentation, assets, and a very clear picture of what's actually going on here. Second, I want to do 3 things before we schedule any meeting. 1. Establish an irrevocable trust and transfer the portfolio into it. Even if someone managed to get conservatorship over you personally, they could not touch the trust assets without a separate legal proceeding that would take years. 2. Get a capacity evaluation from Dr. James Whitfield at Memorial Health. He's the best in this region, and his evaluations have held up in every case I brought them into. 3. Document everything going forward. Georgia is a one-party consent state. You can record any conversation you're part of. She handed me a small digital recorder that fit in a coat pocket. "Every call," she said. "Every visit. Start now." I did. Bethany called 4 days later. I pressed record before I answered. "Winifred, I just want to check in. Owen said you needed time, and I completely understand that. Change is hard, but I want you to know we really do have your best interests at heart." "I know you do," I said. "The Harbor Springs unit is still available. They've been very patient, but I think we're coming up on the limit of how long they can hold it. When did you put down the deposit?" A pause. "What?" "The deposit to hold the unit. When did you put it down?" A longer pause. I put down a small deposit, yes, just to hold our place in line. It's refundable, before or after you called me about the house. She didn't answer that directly. She said, I was being proactive, Winifred. I didn't want us to lose the opportunity. I see, I said. I'll be in touch. I saved the recording, labeled it with the date and time, and added it to the folder. Dr. Whitfield's evaluation took 4.5 hours over 2 sessions. Cognitive tests, financial literacy assessments, scenario-based judgment questions. He asked me to explain the difference between a cap rate and a gross rent multiplier. I explained both, plus their respective limitations. He asked me to calculate the net operating income on a hypothetical property. I did it in my head before he finished the question. When we finished, he sat back and said, Mrs. Cole, your cognitive function scores in the 96th percentile for your age group. Your financial reasoning is, honestly, it's exceptional. I'd testify to that under any circumstances. Could you put it in writing? I'll have it notarized by Thursday. 2 weeks after the dinner in Atlanta, I called Owen and asked him to come to Savannah. Just Owen. He arrived on a Saturday morning looking like a man who hadn't slept well in some time, which was accurate. We sat on the porch with coffee, and I said, Before anything else, I need to tell you something about your father. He looked up. Your father was not a mid-level contractor, Owen. He never was. I need you to know who he actually was and who I actually am before we have the conversation that's coming. I told him about Cole Medical Properties. I watched his face move through disbelief, confusion, and then something that looked like a kind of grief, not for anything lost, but for how long he'd gone without knowing. He asked why we never told him. I told him the truth. The same truth I've already told you about the radiologist's son and Georgia Tech, and the kind of man we wanted Owen to become. He was quiet for a long time. The fig tree was flowering. A mockingbird was making a racket in the neighbor's oak. Does Bethany know? He asked. No. He looked at his coffee. She's going to. He stopped. I know, I said. That's why I needed to tell you first, so that what happens next doesn't come as a shock to you. So you can decide, with full information, what you want to do. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, Mom, I think I made a mistake. I think she influenced you toward a conclusion you might not have reached on your own. That's different from a mistake. I should have just called you without her, and said, I don't know. I should have asked instead of told. Yes, I said. You should have. We sat there for another hour without talking much, just drinking coffee and watching the street wake up. Before he left, he hugged me at the car. Not the brief, guilty hug from the dinner in Atlanta, a real one. I held on for a moment longer than I normally would. 3 days later, Eleanor's office was ready. She had scheduled what she called a disclosure meeting. Her word, not mine. Owen and Bethany arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Bethany wore a charcoal blazer and brought her own leather folder, which I recognized as the same one from the Atlanta dinner. She set it on the conference table with the brisk confidence of someone arriving to finalize an arrangement. Eleanor thanked them for coming and said that I had some things to share before any decisions were made. Bethany smiled in a way that suggested she was being patient. I began. I'd like to start by asking a simple question, I said. Bethany, what did you believe Gerald did for a living? She tilted her head slightly. He was in property management. Commercial, I think. Mid-level. And me? Office work. Medical billing. Owen mentioned once. She glanced at Owen, who was looking at the table. That's what we allowed people to believe, I said. The truth is different. Eleanor slid the first folder across the table. The Cole Medical Properties Partnership Agreement, 1996. Notarized, stamped, real. Bethany leaned forward and read it. She read it twice. Something shifted in her face, though she kept it controlled. This is a partnership agreement, she said. For a commercial real estate LLC. Our LLC, I said. Gerald and I, equal partners. We founded it in 1996 with one medical office building in Augusta and grew it over 28 years. How large? Owen asked, though he already knew. He was asking for her benefit. Eleanor opened the second folder. The Meridian Valuation Appraisal. 19 buildings, 94% occupancy, portfolio value $31.4 million, Bethany's hand stilled on the table. 31 million, Eleanor said helpfully. That's the current appraised value, independent assessment, conducted 8 months ago. The portfolio generates approximately $2.1 million annually in net operating income. That's not, Bethany started. Possible, I said. We drove Camrys and shopped at Kroger because conspicuous wealth makes you a target. We'd managed enough wealthy clients' properties to know what money does to people who didn't earn it. We wanted Owen to be a good engineer because he loved engineering, not because it was his backup plan. Owen exhaled slowly. Eleanor opened the third folder. My personal accounts, the Fidelity brokerage, the Schwab account, the insurance payout, Gerald's rolled IRA, numbers read aloud, one by one, in the unhurried way of someone who has done this before and knows the value of silence between the figures. Total liquid assets, $7.19 million. Total real estate, including the portfolio and the house on Magnolia Lane, $32.1 million. Combined net worth, approximately $39.2 million. The conference room was very quiet. Outside, I could hear a streetcar on Bay Street. You let me believe, Bethany said, and her voice had a new quality to it, not anger exactly, but the particular sound of a plan disintegrating. You let me think. I allowed you to assume, I said. There's a distinction. This changes everything, she said, turning to Owen. Yes, he said. It does. What I mean is, clearly there's more than enough for everyone, the conservatorship concern, the financial management. That was only because we thought. There will be no conservatorship, Eleanor said, and the words settled into the room like something heavy. She opened the fourth folder, Dr. Whitfield's evaluation. She read the conclusion aloud. Cognitive function in the 96th percentile for age group. Financial reasoning described as exceptional. Full capacity to manage her own affairs. No indicators whatsoever of diminished function. Any attempt to claim otherwise, Eleanor said, would be dismissed by any court in this state within the first 15 minutes of a hearing. I never said she was incompetent, Bethany said quickly. Eleanor looked at her. No, you said that if I wasn't handled proactively, the alternative may be less comfortable. Would you like me to play the recording? Bethany went still. Georgia is a one-party consent state, Eleanor said. Winifred had every right to record conversations in which she participated. We have the call from March 4th, the dinner conversation from February 15th as recounted in contemporaneous notes, and several text messages from Owen's phone that were voluntarily provided. She looked at Owen, who gave a small nod. We also have confirmation that you placed a deposit at Harbor Springs 8 days before the dinner in Atlanta, not after. Before. Owen turned to look at his wife. I was being practical, she said. I was thinking ahead. You were thinking ahead before you asked her, Owen said. His voice was quiet, which was worse than if he'd shouted. You already had the agent lined up. You already had the deposit down. You already had the positive deposit down. You already had the power of attorney drafted. This wasn't a conversation. This was a closing. Bethany opened her mouth and closed it. Eleanor set down the final folder, the irrevocable trust documents, signed and recorded. All major assets transferred. Winifred Cole as primary beneficiary during her lifetime. Owen Cole as beneficiary upon her death, contingent on maintaining a good faith relationship with the grantor. Eleanor herself as trustee, even in the unlikely event that someone obtained conservatorship over Winifred personally, Eleanor said. These assets are untouchable without separate legal proceedings that would take years and cost more than they'd recover. We are also prepared to file a complaint with the Georgia Real Estate Commission regarding Sandra Pruitt's conduct and to pursue civil action for elder financial intimidation under Georgia Code 35-8 if this matter is not resolved today. Bethany stood. Sit down, Owen said. She looked at him. He looked back. She sat. What do you want? She asked me, and for the first time her voice had no performance in it. Just the question. I want my house, I said. I want my life. I want to make my own decisions about my own money for as many years as I have left. I want my son back, the one who existed before he handed that part of himself over to someone who didn't deserve it. And I want you to understand, clearly and permanently, that my age is not an invitation. Eleanor laid out the terms. No contact from Bethany. Calls, texts, visits, any communication on pain of a restraining order and bar complaints. Owen could contact me when and as he chose, but would never again question my competence, my choices, or my right to live as I saw fit. The Harbour Springs deposit would be refunded. The listing agreement with Sandra Pruitt would be cancelled. All documents Bethany had prepared regarding my assets were void. You have 72 hours to accept in writing, Eleanor said. After that, we file everything. Bethany left without saying anything else. The door closed with the particular quietness of expensive office buildings. Owen stayed. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. And after a while he said, I don't know how I got here. I know. She made it sound so reasonable. She said you were struggling. She said she was worried. She may have even believed some of it, I said. That's what makes it complicated. I should have called you, just called you the day she first brought it up, and said, Mum, is this true? Are you okay? What do you need? Yes, I said. That would have been the right thing. He looked up. Can you forgive me? I thought about it honestly, the way he deserved. Not yet, but I think I'll get there. You're my son, Owen. That doesn't stop being true because you made a bad choice. It just means you have work to do. He nodded. Get a good therapist, I said, and think very carefully about your marriage, not for my sake, for yours. He submitted his written agreement the next morning. Bethany signed it too, through her own attorney, 2 days later. No apology, which told me everything I needed to know about who she was and wasn't. 11 months have passed since that meeting. I'm sitting on the porch on Magnolia Lane on a Thursday evening, watching the light come through the fig tree the way it does in late afternoon when the shadows get long. Gerald planted that tree the summer Owen was born, and it's been producing figs every August for 42 years, which seems like a reasonable definition of legacy. Owen filed for divorce in May. The proceedings were what his attorney called contentious, which I understand is a legal word for expensive and unpleasant. Bethany's argument that she was entitled to a share of Owen's future inheritance was rejected by the judge, who was not particularly sympathetic after Eleanor submitted the recordings as character evidence. The divorce was finalized in September. Owen lives in a rental house in Savannah now, 6 blocks from me. We have dinner on Tuesday nights, and he's learning to cook. Last month he made shrimp and grits from scratch, which is either a sign of personal growth or a man trying very hard to impress his mother, and I am content with either interpretation. I also did something this past year that I hadn't planned on doing. I took on 3 tenants in my smaller rental property in the Ardsley Park neighborhood, all women, all referred through a partnership with a local senior services organization. All 3 had experienced some form of financial pressure from family members. One had been told she could no longer manage her own accounts. One had been asked to sign over her car. One had simply been worn down, slowly, by the accumulation of small dismissals until she'd stopped trusting her own judgment. They pay what they can. In exchange, they look after each other and the property. We have dinner together on the first Sunday of every month. Last week, one of them, a woman named Gloria, who is 71 and spent 30 years as a school librarian, told me she'd opened her own bank account for the first time in 12 years and put $300 in it. Whose name is on the account? I asked. Mine, she said. Just mine. We toasted with sweet tea, and it felt like the most important thing that had happened all month. I also received a call in October from Howard, my accountant, who had heard through a professional contact that Sandra Pruitt, the real estate agent Bethany had hired to list my house, was under investigation by the Georgia Real Estate Commission. Apparently, the Harbour Springs arrangement wasn't the first time she'd been involved in steering elderly homeowners toward below-market sales. They were looking at 6 other cases. I gave Eleanor's name to the investigator who called me, and whatever happens next is in hands more qualified than mine. There's something I've been thinking about since this started, something I want to say in case you're hearing this story and some part of it sounds familiar. The scariest part wasn't the conservatorship threat. It wasn't even the power of attorney document sitting on Bethany's table like a trap she'd laid while I was still wearing the clothes from my son's wedding. The scariest part was how long I'd been invisible, how many years I'd spent in yellow cardigans and grocery store coupons while someone constructed a story about who I was, old, soft, manageable, and I had let it happen, Not because it was true, but because I was grieving and tired, and I'd stopped paying attention to how other people were describing me. Gerald used to say that the most dangerous assumption in any negotiation is the one your opponent makes about what you're willing to accept. He was talking about commercial leases. He was also talking about everything else. I am 69 years old. I co-built a $31 million business while packing school lunches and attending Little League games and being exactly who everyone expected me to be. I watched my husband die in a hospital room in March and held his hand until there was no longer any point in holding it. I sat in grief for 14 months and let someone mistake my silence for surrender. That was the last time. The fig tree will put out fruit again in August. I'll be here to pick it. In my house, on my terms, on a porch I've sat on for 31 years and intend to sit on for however many years are left. And if you are somewhere out there, eating cold takeout alone, fielding phone calls that feel like they're about your welfare but somehow always end up being about your assets, I want you to know that your silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's the only thing standing between you and someone who has badly misjudged what you're holding. Know what you're holding. I keep coming back to the fig tree. Gerald planted it the summer Owen was born. In the same week he filed our partnership papers. In the same week he looked at me across a kitchen table in a house we could barely afford and said, "We're going to build something." He wasn't talking about the tree, but he was not talking about it either. Something you tend carefully over decades that asks nothing of you except patience and gives back more than you ever expected. I think about what would have happened if I had been who Bethany assumed I was, an old woman in a yellow cardigan with a dented Camry and a house she couldn't maintain. If the story she'd told herself had been true, she would have gotten the house. She would have gotten the power of attorney. She would have installed me in a studio apartment in Pula and called it care, and I would have had no recourse because I would have had nothing to stand on. What protected me wasn't luck. It was 4 decades of decisions made quietly and consistently in the right direction. Gerald and I chose to build something real instead of something visible. We chose to raise Owen to be a man who worked because he loved his work, not because he was waiting on an inheritance. We chose honesty with each other even when it was easier to let things go unspoken. Those choices accumulated the way interest accumulates, invisibly, patiently, until the day you need them. That's what I mean when I say Bethany's biggest mistake wasn't greed. It was laziness. She looked at the surface of my life, the cardigan, the Kroger receipts, the 2009 Camry, and decided she already knew everything. She didn't do the harder, more honest work of asking who I actually was. Genuine integrity, I've come to believe, includes the integrity of seeing other people clearly, not just as projections of what we want or need them to be. She failed that. And because she failed it, every move she made was built on a foundation that didn't exist. Owen failed it too for a while. He loved her, and love can be a kind of willful blindness when it's mixed with the need to be chosen by someone. But what I saw in him, in those quiet months after everything came out, was something I recognized from when he was small, that fundamental decency that couldn't stay buried forever. He made bad choices, but he is not a bad man. There's a difference. And I held on to that difference while I waited for him to find his way back to himself. That took its own kind of strength from me, the willingness to stay open to someone who had hurt me while they did the work of becoming trustworthy again. And then there's what I had to do myself. I had spent 14 months in grief so deep I'd stopped paying attention. I'd let my silence become invisible. I let other people tell the story of who I was, and I hadn't corrected them, and they had taken that silence as permission. Reclaiming my life required something harder than anger. It required clarity about what I had, what I'd built, what I deserved, and what I was willing to do to protect it. That kind of clear-eyed resolve doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from knowing your own history well enough to stand in it without flinching. Gloria put $300 in a bank account with only her name on it, and we toasted with sweet tea like she'd won something. She had. So had I. Not the house, not the money. Those were always mine. What I won back was the habit of knowing my own worth without waiting for someone else to confirm it. The fig tree will fruit again in August. I'll be on the porch to see it.